The quietest legend inside Lincoln High spent 30 years driving the same 12-year-old Camry into the parking lot. Every single day he unwrapped the same modest sandwich at his desk and let everyone assume he was just getting by like everybody else. His name was Arthur, and he taught chemistry. The week he finally retired, a coworker stumbled onto the truth almost by chance. Quiet, unremarkable Arthur was sitting on more than $1.2 million. Nobody had a clue, because Arthur had committed the one truly unforgivable act in American culture. He looked completely ordinary while being secretly, enormously wealthy. Meanwhile, across town, a man named Dean had outearned Arthur every single year for 3 decades straight. Right now he's standing on the deck of a boat he still owes money on. He named it Freedom. He's refreshing his banking app, staring at a retirement account holding roughly $40,000. Same 30 years. One quiet millionaire. One loud budget. And the reason for the gap between them is so mundane it's almost offensive. I'm Yank, and today we're digging into why most people never reach millionaire status, and why a select few quietly, unremarkably do. If you've ever stared at your bank balance wondering whether you're personally failing or whether the whole system is rigged, stick with me, because the truth is a mix of both, and the numbers tell a story most people won't say out loud. Quick disclaimer before we dive in, I'm not a financial advisor, and none of this is financial advice. This is simply what happens when someone spends far too much time staring at wealth statistics that everyone else scrolls straight past. Let's start with a figure that sounds like fantastic news and is actually a bit of a magic trick. The average American household is technically a millionaire. Seriously, the mean household net worth in the US sits around $1,059,000. On paper, that means the typical family has crossed the $1 million threshold. Congratulations to all of us, I suppose. Except that's not the typical family at all. The median household, the one sitting dead center, with half the country richer and half poorer, is worth about $192,000. Not a million. That gap between $1,059,000 and $192,000 is the entire subject of this video. Here's why those numbers are so far apart. Averages lie the moment the room becomes lopsided. Picture 9 regular people in a bar, and then Jeff Bezos walks in. Suddenly the average net worth in that room jumps to about $40 billion, yet not one of the original 9 people can cover the tab. Remember that lopsided bar trick, because it's going to resurface. A small cluster of extraordinarily wealthy households drags the average sky high while the real middle sits far below it. The top 1% of households control 31% of all wealth nationwide. The bottom half hold roughly 2.5%. So when someone claims the average American is doing just fine, what they're actually describing is the top 15% wearing the rest of the country like a costume. It gets worse once you examine what that median net worth is made of. Strip out home equity, the value trapped inside a house you still have to live in, and the median household is worth about $66,000. That's it. That's the real, liquid, spendable cushion for the families sitting in the exact middle of America, $66,000 standing between them and disaster. So here's the real question: if the middle is that thin, how does anyone reach the other side? How does an Arthur happen? Because millionaires absolutely do exist, roughly 24 million of them in this country, more than any other nation on earth. Something is clearly working for somebody. So let's talk about who these people actually are, because I promise you, it isn't who you're picturing. When you imagine a millionaire, you probably picture Dean's boat, inherited wealth, a trust fund, a fancy title, a startup that took off. Let's kill that image right now. The largest study we have on the subject, surveying more than 10,000 American millionaires, found that 79% received zero inheritance. Zero. 89% are first-generation wealthy, nobody handed them a head start. They built everything from the ground up. Their careers? This is my favorite part. The top 5 professions among these millionaires were engineer, accountant, teacher, manager, and attorney. Teachers outranked doctors. Sit with that for a second. the person grading chemistry tests is statistically more likely to become a millionaire than the person performing your annual physical. 1/3 of these millionaires never earned six figures in a single year across their entire working lives. Not once. 93% credited plain, unglamorous consistency, not a huge salary, for getting them there. And most of them didn't attend some elite university either. The majority graduated from ordinary public state schools, the same kind sitting off the highway in your own state right now. There was no secret door, no cheat code, just an ordinary person with an ordinary job who did one specific thing differently. We're about to uncover exactly what that thing was. This next part tends to break people's brains, so let me say it plainly: income is not wealth. They are two entirely separate things, and mixing them up is the single most expensive mistake in personal finance. There's an old framework that splits people into two camps: the income statement affluent and the balance sheet affluent. The income statement affluent look rich, a big paycheck, a big house, a big truck, the whole performance, but their net worth is basically a rounding error, because everything coming in immediately flows right back out. That's Dean. He never had a money-earning problem, he had a money-keeping problem. The balance sheet affluent are the opposite. They might look aggressively average, a modest car, a modest house, nothing worth stealing, yet their net worth is massive because for decades they quietly set aside a portion of everything they earned. That's Arthur. Nobody at his school considered him wealthy. He drove a 12-year-old Camry and packed his own lunch. He simply happened to be a millionaire the entire time and told absolutely nobody, because that's usually how it works. Here's what that divergence actually looked like in practice. Every couple of years, Dean received a solid raise. One year it was $12,000. And Dean did what felt completely reasonable: he let his lifestyle expand to match it. That $12,000 raise quietly turned into roughly $400 more a month in truck payments, a slightly larger apartment, and nicer dinners he genuinely earned. By December, the raise had vanished, absorbed and invisible, and Dean honestly couldn't have told you where it went. He repeated that pattern with every raise for 30 straight years. Arthur received smaller raises, and every single time one arrived, he did something almost aggressively dull with it. He bumped up one automatic transfer, the kind that quietly pulls money out of checking on payday before he ever sees it, and then forgot the transfer even existed. That's the entire divergence, $400 at a time. One man let his money drift toward lifestyle. The other redirected his money once toward his future and then went back to teaching a room full of teenagers about covalent bonds. So if income isn't the deciding factor, where does the real failure happen? Because most people aren't failing at earning, they're failing at a step nobody ever explained to them. Look at the median again, this time for retirement accounts, and it's genuinely rough. The average 401k balance in the US sits around $168,000. Sounds okay-ish, right? Except there's that lopsided bar trick again. That average is Bezos walking into the retirement account bar and yanking the number skyward while everyone else nurses a much smaller drink. The median 401k, the one in the actual middle, is around $44,000. 3 out of 4 people have less than that so-called average. It gets even more brutal the closer you look at people nearing retirement. For households aged 55 to 64, right at the doorstep of retirement, the median balance is about $17,000. That's supposed to last 20 or 30 years. Calling that a nest egg is generous, it's a nest egg that skipped a few meals and is afraid to open its mail. Now, part of this is a savings problem, and I want to be fair about that, but I also want to be fair about how razor-thin the margins really are. The personal savings rate in America right now hovers around 3%. 3 cents out of every dollar. And a massive share of the country literally cannot save more, because there's nothing left after rent, groceries, insurance, and gas. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans couldn't cover a surprise $1,000 expense out of savings. More than a quarter have no emergency savings whatsoever. So when some finance guru wags a finger and says just skip the lattes, understand that for a lot of these households, there were never any lattes to begin with. the cushion was gone before the coffee. I want to slow down here, because that 3% figure isn't just an abstraction, it's a feeling, and you may know it intimately. It's checking your balance before tapping your card at the grocery store. It's doing silent math in the school pickup line over whether the field trip fee and the electric bill can both survive the same week. It's quietly setting one item back on the conveyor belt while the person behind you politely looks away. It's lying awake at 2 a.m. calculating, for the fourth time, whether the check engine light can wait until the next paycheck. That's what a 3% savings rate actually feels like from the inside. It isn't laziness, it's a math problem handed to you and left to solve alone, in the dark, with the wrong tools. But here's where it gets truly maddening: even people who do have room to invest routinely sabotage themselves, not because they're foolish, but because they're human. There's a long-running study tracking what the average investor actually earns versus what the market hands out for free, and over the last couple of decades, the average investor trailed the market by more than a full percentage point every single year, some years by far more. In one recent year, the gap exceeded 8 percentage points. Why? Because when the market drops, people panic and sell. When it surges, they get greedy and pile back in. They buy high and sell low, over and over, guaranteeing they capture the fear and miss the recovery. Which brings us to the real engine, the thing Arthur understood and Dean never did: compounding. I need you to really absorb this, because it's the entire ballgame. And before you assume 7% sounds made up, it isn't. Over the last century, the broad American stock market has returned somewhere around 10% a year on average before inflation, and roughly 7% after inflation takes its cut. Nobody needed to pick some genius stock to capture that, you simply had to own the whole market and refuse to flinch. That's the number Arthur quietly rode for 30 years while Dean was busy trying to time it, outsmart it, and mostly just ignore it. Let's run the math on becoming a millionaire from absolutely nothing. If you invest and earn roughly a 7% return, starting at age 30, you'd need to set aside about $610 a month to hit $1 million by retirement. Totally achievable for plenty of households, not easy, but doable. Now watch what happens when you wait. Start that exact same plan at 40 instead of 30, and the number jumps to about $1,300 a month. Wait until 50, and now you need over $3,200 a month to reach the same finish line. Every decade you delay roughly doubles the toll, because you've stolen years away from the one ingredient compounding actually runs on: time. And here's the cruelest, most beautiful detail about time in the market: nearly all of the market's gains come from a tiny handful of days. If you'd had $10,000 invested over the last 20 years and stayed put the entire time, you'd have ended up with around $72,000. But if you got scared, jumped out, and happened to miss just the 10 best days out of those 20 years, you'd end up with less than half that. Miss a few more of those days, and you'd barely break even. The cruel part is that those explosive best days almost always land right next to the scariest worst days, so the people who panic sell during a crash miss the rebound by mere hours. Arthur never sold. Honestly, he barely even looked. That was the entire strategy: do nothing on purpose, for 30 years. Now, I could stop right here and say just invest early and don't panic, and pretend this is purely a story about personal willpower, but that would be a lie, and you'd smell it immediately. Because for millions of people, the reason they never become millionaires has nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with a system that quietly locked the door before they ever arrived. Let me show you exactly what I mean. That entire beautiful compounding machine, the 401k, the automatic contributions, the employer match, all of it, 42% of full-time workers have no access to any workplace retirement plan whatsoever. None. And it breaks down exactly along the lines you'd expect: among the lowest earners, nearly 79% have no access at all. Among the highest earners, it's only 18%. So the single most powerful wealth-building tool in American life, the tax breaks, the free matching money, the effortless automatic investing, gets handed out most generously to the people who already need it least. It's like a government program handing out free umbrellas only to the people already standing indoors, while the folks actually getting rained on don't qualify. That's not a personal failing, that's the architecture of the system itself. And then there's the ground everyone is standing on, which has been quietly tilting for 40 years. Since around 1980, wages for the typical worker have barely crawled forward. Meanwhile, housing has gotten dramatically pricier relative to income, healthcare has outrun paychecks by a mile, and college costs have gone completely feral. A home used to cost roughly 3 times the typical household's income, now it's over 5 times that. So the money previous generations had left over to invest, the surplus that fed the compounding machine, has been steadily devoured by the basic cost of having a roof, a body, and a degree. You're not imagining it. The gap between the raise you received and the life it's supposed to fund is real and measurable. When your parents tell you they bought their first house at your age on a single salary, they're not lying, and they're not smarter than you, they simply happen to be standing in the economy before the floor tilted. Same effort, completely different physics. Add it all up, and the picture is clear, you can only ride the wave if you already own a surfboard. So the last few decades of soaring home and stock prices didn't lift the people with no assets, it left them further behind. That's exactly why the wealth gaps between different groups aren't closing. The typical white family holds several times the wealth of the typical black or Hispanic family, and when asset prices boom, that dollar gap doesn't shrink, it widens. Booms reward the people who are already in. So if you've been sitting there this whole time feeling a quiet hum of shame, feeling like everyone else received a manual you never got, I need you to hear this, you are not the problem. A 3% savings rate isn't a national character flaw. It's the mathematical fingerprint of an economy where the essentials devour the paycheck before the paycheck can build anything. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, it just wasn't designed for you. By the way, quick note, since we're on the subject of building something from zero inside a rough economy, I started a free community where I break down exactly this kind of thing, how to grow real income streams and stay on track even when the whole system feels stacked against you. It's completely free, even if you're starting from absolute zero. The link's in the description if that interests you. Okay, so the system is tilted, the door is locked for a lot of people, and the math is unforgiving. Where does that leave you specifically, right now? Somewhere more hopeful than it sounds, and here's the strange twist at the center of all of this, the thing I promised you back at the start was almost insulting, the recipe is stupidly simple. Genuinely one of the most boring recipes in existence. Buy a low-cost fund that owns essentially the entire market. Put money in every single month, automatically, so you never have to feel brave. Then do the single hardest thing a human being can do, nothing. Don't sell when it drops. Don't get clever. Don't try to beat it. That's the whole thing. That's the secret the boat salesmen don't want framed on your wall. Congratulations, you just learned the entire strategy in one sentence, and somehow it's less exciting than assembling flat-pack furniture. And I know exactly what you're thinking, because I'd be thinking it too, Root, that's fine for someone with money left over at the end of the month, but I don't have $600 lying around. And you might be completely right, that's the honest part nobody says out loud. If the margin isn't there yet, the answer isn't to hate yourself. It's to understand precisely what the game actually is, so that the moment even a little room opens up, a raise, a paid-off car, a bit of side income, you point it straight at the machine instead of straight at a nicer version of Dean's boat. Because that's the real difference between our two guys. It was never about the size of the shovel. Dean had a bigger shovel every single year of his life. Arthur just started digging earlier, in the same spot, and refused to stop, refused to panic, and refused to let a good salary trick him into thinking he was already rich. Dean spent 30 years looking wealthy. Arthur spent 30 years quietly being wealthy, and the two are almost never the same people. So no, most people will never become millionaires, and a lot of that genuinely isn't their fault. The plans are locked away from the people who need them most. Wages stalled. Essentials got greedy. All of that is true, and pretending otherwise would be an insult. But some people do make it, and when they do, it almost never looks like the boat. It looks like a chemistry teacher in a 12-year-old Camry who did the boring thing for a very long time and told absolutely nobody. The math is brutal, but it isn't a secret and it isn't magic. It's just early, boring, and relentless, applied to whatever room you can carve out. And if you can find even a sliver of that quiet, unglamorous room and start pointing it toward the future instead of toward the boat, then 30 years from now, you get to be the person nobody realized was rich the whole time. If you want help finding that first bit of room, that free community is waiting. Either way, start today, because the one thing you can never buy back later is time.